Okay, back with you to share the rest of chapter 1 and chapter 2 of The Watsons Go to Birmingham. Remember, we had Byron, his lips are stuck on the mirror of the car on the outside. Dad tried to straighten his face out when Mama and Joey came running back with a steaming glass of hot water, but the tears were still running down his cheeks. Mama tried to pour water on the mirror, but her hands were shaking so much she was splashing it all over the place. Dad tried too, but he couldn't look at Byron without laughing and shaking. That meant I had to do it. I knew that if my lips were frozen on something and everybody was shaking too much to pour water on them except for Byron, he'd do some real cruel stuff to me. He probably would have accidentally splashed my eyes until they were frozen open or put water in my ears until I couldn't hear anything. But not me. I gently poured a little stream of water over the mirror. Dad was right. This was the worst thing we could do. The water made a cracking sound and froze solid as soon as it touched the mirror and By's lips. Maybe By's mouth was frozen, but his hands sure weren't. And he popped me right in the forehead, hard. I hate to say it, but I started crying too. It's no wonder the neighbors called us the weird Watsons behind our backs. There we were, all 5 of us standing around a car with the temperature about 1,000,000 degrees below zero and each and every one of us crying. Top, 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 Byron yelled. Daniel Watson, what are we gonna do? Mama went nuts. You gotta get this boy to the hospital. My baby is gonna die. Dad tried to look serious real quick. Willona, how far do you think I'd get driving down the street with this little clown attached to the mirror? What am I supposed to do? Have him run beside the car all the way down to the emergency room? Mama looked real close at By's mouth, closed her eyes for a second like she was praying, and finally said, Daniel, you get in there and call the hospital and see what they say we should do. Joey and Kenny, go with your daddy. Dad and Joey went crying into the house. I stayed by the brown bomber. I figured Mama was clearing everybody out for something. Byron did too and looked at Mama in a real nervous way. Mama put her scarf around Byron's neck and said, Sweetheart, you know we got to do something. I'm trying to warm your face up a little bit. Just relax. Okay, You know I love you and wouldn't do anything to hurt you, right? If Mama was trying to make Byron relax, she wasn't doing a very good job of it at all. All this talk about love and not getting hurt was making him real nervous. What are you gonna do, huh? Don't hurt me. Kenny, help. Mama moved the scarf away and put one hand on Byron's chin and the other on his forehead. No, help, hi, Kenny. Mama gave Byron's head a good hard snatch, and my eyes automatically shut and my hands automatically flew over to cover my ears and my mouth automatically flew open and screamed, ah! I didn't see it, but I bet Byron's lips stretched a mile before they finally let go of that mirror. I bet his lips looked like a giant rubber band before they snapped away from that glass. I didn't hear it, but I bet Byron's lips made a sound like a giant piece of paper being ripped in half. When I opened my eyes, Byron was running to the house with his hands over his mouth and Mama following right behind him. I ran over to the mirror to see how much of Byron's mouth was still stuck there. The dirty dogs let Byron get away with not doing his share of the windows, and I had to do the whole car by myself. When we finally got to Aunt Sydney's house, I decided to pay Byron back for punching me in the forehead and getting out of doing all his part of the window scraping. Joey was sitting between us, so I felt kind of safe. I said to her loud, "Joetta, guess what? I'm thinking about writing my own comic book." "What about?" "Well, it's going to be about this real mean criminal who has a terrible accident that turns him into a superhero." Joey knew I was going to tease Byron, so she sat there looking like I should be careful about what I said. Finally, I asked her, "Do you want to know what I'm going to call this new superhero?" "What?" "I'm going to call him Lipless Wonder. All he does is beat up superheroes smaller than him, and the only thing he's afraid of is a cold mirror." All the Weir Watsons, except Byron, cracked up. Mama's hand even covered her mouth. I was the only one who saw Byron flip me a dirty finger sign and try to whisper without smearing all the Vaseline Mama had put on his lips. "You wait, I'm going to kick your little behind." Then he made his eyes go crossed, which was his favorite way of teasing me. But I didn't care. I knew who had won this time. Chapter 2. Give my regards to Clark Poindexter. Larry Dunn was the king of the kindergarten to 4th grade, where I went to school at Clark Elementary. He was king because he was a lot older than anyone else and twice as strong as the rest of us. He was stronger because he was almost full grown and he'd flunked some grades 2, maybe 3 times. He was the 3rd oldest kid at Clark. The only ones older than him and stronger than him were Byron and Buphead, who were in the 6th grade and who'd also flunked some grades at least once. We weren't sure because it was something that Mama and Daddy didn't talk about. Larry Dunn was king of the kindergarten to 4th grade only because Byron didn't care about them. Larry was the king of Clark, but Byron was the god. It seemed like that would make me a prince or a real strong angel or something, but it didn't work that way. I was just another 4th grade punk. I guess having the school's god as my brother did give me some kind of special rights, but not a whole bunch. It helped me with stupid stuff, like the time I found a dollar bill and got too excited and was crazy enough to show it to Larry Dunn. I knew this was a big mistake about a second before he struck his head out and said, "Let me see it." What could I do? "Kenny," he said, "where'd you find this buck?" "Outside the school, over by Kenilworth." Larry turned my dollar over and over, and I started getting nervous. "You know what, Kenny?" "What?" I held my breath. "This is some real strange stuff, but I lost 50 cents over on Kenilworth yesterday, and I bet my 50 cents got hooked up with someone else's 50 cents and made this whole buck." Whew, I let my breath go, smiled, and nodded. We went to the store to get change, and Larry Dunn got back the 50 cents he lost, and I got to keep the other 50 that got hooked up with Larry's. I knew if it wasn't for Byron being my big brother, Larry would have said something like, "Since my 50 cents found this other 50 cents and they hooked up to make this here buck, I'm going to keep the whole thing." You know, the rules, finders, keepers, losers, sweepers. Having the school's god as my relative helped me some other ways too. I had 2 things wrong with me that would have gotten me beat up and teased a lot more than I did if it hadn't been for By. The first thing was because I love to read, people thought I was real smart, teachers especially. Teachers started treating me different than the other kids when I was in first grade. At first, I thought it was cool for them to think I was smart, but then I found out it made me enemies with some of the other kids. Back when I was in second grade, Miss Henry used to take me to a different classroom and have me read stuff out of the Bible or the newspaper in front of other kids. This was a lot of fun until I started looking up from what I was reading and noticed that while Miss Henry and the other teachers were smiling a mile a minute, all the kids had faces twisted up or were looking at me like I was a six-legged dog. 2 years ago, Miss Henry took me to Mr. Allen's fifth grade class. Mr. Allen was the toughest teacher in the school, and just being in front of him was kind of scary. He looked down at me and said, "Good morning, Mr. Watson. I hope you are in a good form today." I just nodded at him because I wasn't sure what that even meant. "Don't be nervous, Kenny," Miss Henry said. "Mr. Alums would like you to read a few pages from Langston Hughes." She handed me a book and said, "You wait here while we introduce you to the class." Man, some of the time I wished I was as smart as these teachers thought I was, because if I had been, I would have dropped that book and run all the way home. If I'd been smart enough to figure out what was going to happen next, I would have never gone into that room. I stood in the hall looking at the stuff they wanted me to read while Mr. Alums told the class, "All right, I have a special treat for you today. I've often told you that as Negroes, the world is many times a hostile place for us." I saw Mr. Alums walking back and forth, whacking a yardstick in his hand. I've pointed out time and time again how vital it is that one be able to read well. I've stressed on numerous occasions the importance of being familiar and comfortable with literature. Today, Miss Henry and I would like to give you a demonstration of your own possibilities in this regard. I want you to carefully note how advanced this second grade student is, and I particularly want you to be aware of the effect his skills have upon you. I want you to be aware that some of our kids read at miraculous levels. I saw Mr. Alums point the yardstick at someone somewhere in the class and say, "Perhaps you'd like to finish the introduction? I think you know our guest quite well." Whoever he pointed at said, "What? I didn't do nothing." Miss Henry waved for me to come in and stand in front of the class. I guess I was too nervous about Mr. Alums to have recognized the voice before, but as soon as I walked into the room, I froze. There, in the two seats closest to the teacher's desk in the first row, I saw Buphead and Byron. The Langston Hughes book jumped from my hand and the whole class laughed. Everyone but Byron. His eyes locked on mine and I felt things start melting inside of me. Mr. Alums slammed the yardstick on his desk and the class got real quiet. Let's see if you find this so humorous after you've heard how well this young man can read. And Byron Watson, if you are incapable of taking some of the fire out of your eyes, I assure you, I will find a way to assist you. If instead of trying to intimidate your younger brother, you would emulate him and use that mind of yours, perhaps you'd find things much easier. Perhaps you wouldn't be making another appearance in the fifth grade year next year. Now, would you? Byron got one more dirty look in at me and then looked down at his desk. Mr. Alums might as well have tied me up to a pole and said, "Ready, aim, fire." I read through the Langston Hughes stuff real quick, but that was a mistake. Miss Henry said, "Slow down some, Kenneth." And then she took the book from me and handed it back upside down. She had a great big smile when she told Mr. Alums when he goes too fast, this slows him down a bit. I read some more with the book upside down and got some real strange looks from the fifth graders. Finally, they let me quit. Mr. Alum stood up and clapped his hands, and a couple of the old kids did too. Byron never looked at me the whole time, but Bubhead was giving me enough dirty looks for both of them. Bravo! Outstanding, Mr. Watson. Your future is unlimited. Bravo! All I could do was try to figure out how to get home alive. I didn't even get out of the schoolyard before Byron and Bubhead caught up with me. A little crowd bunched up around us, and everyone was real excited because they knew I was about to get jacked up. Bumphead said, "Here that little egghead punk is." "Leave the little clown alone," Byron said. "It's a crying shame taking him around like a circus freak." He punched me kind of soft in the arm and said, "At least you ought to make 'em pay you for doing that mess. If it was me, they'd be coming out they pockets with some folding money every time they took me around." I couldn't believe it. I think Byron was kind of proud of me. When everybody saw Byron wasn't going to do anything to me for being smart, they all decided that they better not do anything either. I still got called Egghead or Poindexter or Professor some of the time, but that wasn't bad compared to what could have happened. The other thing that people would have teased me a lot more about if it hadn't been for Byron was my eye. Mama said it wasn't important that I was a real handsome little boy, but ever since I was born, one of my eyeballs had been kind of lazy. That means instead of looking where I tell it to look, it wanted to rest in the corner of my eye next to my nose. I'd done lots of things to make it better, but none of them worked. I'd done exercises where I had to look that way, then this way, then that way, up and down and up, but when I went to look in the mirror, the eye still went back to its corner. I'd worn a patch on my other eye to make the lazy one work, but that didn't do anything either. It was fun to play like I was a pirate for a while, but that got boring too. Finally, Byron gave me some good advice. He noticed that when I talked to people, I squinted my lazy eye kind of shut, or that I put my hand over my face to cover it. I only did this because it got hard to talk to someone when they were staring at your eye instead of listening to what you say. "Look, man," he told me, "if you don't want people to look at your messed up eye, you just gotta do this." Byron made me stand still and look straight ahead. Then he stood on my side and told me to look at him. I turned my head to look. "No, man, keep your head straight and look at me sideways." I did it. "See, you ain't cockeyed no more. Your eye's as straight as an arrow now." I went to the bathroom, stood on the toilet, and leaned over to look in the mirror sideways, and Byron was right. I couldn't help smiling. Mama was right, too. I was a kind of handsome little guy when I looked at myself sideways, and both eyes were pointing in the same direction. Even though my older brother was Clark Elementary School's god, that didn't mean I never got teased or beat up at all. I still had to fight a lot and still got called Cockeyed Kenny And I still had people stare at my eye and still had to watch when they made their eyes go crossed when they were teasing me. It seemed like one of these things happened to me every day, but if it hadn't been for Byron, I knew they'd have happened a whole lot more. That's why I was kind of nervous about what was going to happen if Byron ever got out of 6th grade and went to junior high school before I caught up to him. That's why I was going to send off for that book, Learn Karate in 3 weeks. That was in the back of my comic books. The worst part about being teased was riding the school bus on those mornings when Byron and Buphead decided they were going to skip school. We'd be standing on the corner waiting for the bus, Byron, Buphead, and all the other old thugs in one bunch. Larry Dunn, Banky, and all the other young thugs in another bunch. The regular kids like Joetta in a third bunch and me off to the side by myself. When we saw the bus about 3 blocks away, we all got in a line, old thugs, young thugs, regular kids, then me. It wasn't until the bus stopped and the door opened that I knew whether Bi and Buphead were going. I hated it when Bi walked past and said, "Give my regards to Clark, Poindexter." Some of the time, those words were like a signal for the other kids to jump on me. But the day I stopped hating the bus so much began with those same words. We were all lined up. "Give my regards to Clark, Poindexter," Bi said, and disappeared around the bus's back. I got on the bus and took the seat right behind the bus driver. The days Bi rode, I would sit a few rows from him in the back. On other days, the driver was the most protection. The bus drove down into public housing, and after everyone was picked up, we headed toward Clark. But today, the bus driver did something he'd never done before. He noticed 2 kids running up late, and he stopped to let them get on. Every other time someone was late, he'd just laugh at them and tell the rest of us, "This is the only way you little punks are gonna learn to be punctual. I hope that fool has a pleasant walk to school." Then no matter how hard the late kid banged on the side of the bus, the driver would just take off, laughing out the window. That was one of my miracle. That was part 1 of my miracle that let me know something special was going to happen. As soon as the doors of the bus swung open and 2 strange new boys got on, part 2 of my miracle happened. Every once in a while, Mama would make me go to Sunday school with Joey. Even though it was just a bunch of singing and coloring in coloring books and listening to Miss Davidson, I had learned one thing. I had learned about getting saved. I learned how someone could come to you when you were feeling real bad and could take all of your problems away and make you feel better. I learned that the person who saved you, your personal saver, was sent by God to protect you and to help you out. When the bigger one of the 2 boys got on the bus late, said to the driver in a real down south accent, "Thank you for stopping, sir." I knew right away, I knew that God had finally gotten sick of me being teased and picked on all the time. As I looked at this new boy with a great big smile and a jacket with holes in the sleeves and the raggedy tennis shoes and the tore up blue jeans, I knew who he was. Maybe he didn't live a million years ago, and maybe he didn't have a beard and long hair, and maybe he wasn't born under a star, but I knew anyway. I knew God had finally sent me some help. I knew God had finally sent me my personal saver. As soon as the boys thanked the driver in that real polite, real country way, I jerked around in my seat to see what the other kids were going to do to him. Whenever someone new started coming to Clark, most of the kids took some time to see what he was like. The boys would see if he was tough or weak, if he was cool or square, and the girls would look to see if he was cute or ugly. Then they decided how to treat him. I knew they weren't going to waste any time with this new guy. It was going to be real easy and real quick with him. He was like nobody we've seen before. He was raggedy. He was a country. He was skinny, and he was smiling at everybody a smile a minute. The boy with him had to be his little brother. He looked like a skunk-up version of the big one. Everyone had stopped what they were doing and were real quiet. Some were standing up to get a better look. The older one got an even bigger smile on his face and waved real hard at everybody. The little shrunk up one smiled and did the same thing. Then they said, "Hiya, y'all." And I knew that here was someone who was going to be easier for the kids to make fun of than even me. Most of the kids were just staring. Then Larry Dunn said, "Lord, today look at that nappy-headed, down-home country cornflake the cat done drugged up from Mississippi, y'all." About 1,000,000 fingers pointed at the new kids, and 1,000,000 laughs also knocked them over. Larry Dunn threw an apple core from the back of the bus, and the new kid got his hand up just in time to block it from hitting his face. Little bits of apple exploded all over the kid, his brother, and me. The other kids were wild, laughing and saying to each other, "Hi, y'all." The bus driver jumped out of his seat and stood between the new kid and Larry. You see how you kids is? This boy shows some manners and some respect, and y'all want to attack him? That's why none of y'all ever going to be nothing." The bus driver was really mad. "Larry Dunn, you better sit your beep down and cut this mess out. I know you don't want to start panning on folks, do ya? Not with what I know about your mama." Someone said, "Ooh," and Larry sat down. The bus was real quiet. We'd never seen the driver get this mad before. He pushed the two new kids into the same seat as me and told them, "Don't you pay no mind to them little fools. They ain't happy lest they be dragging someone down." Then he had to add, "Y'all just sit next to Poindexter. He don't bother nobody." I sat there and looked at them sideways. I didn't say anything to them, and they didn't say anything to me. But I was kind of surprised that God would send a savior to me in such raggedy clothes.